do think the Meno lends itself in a very natural way to be broken up into different sections. This second one, what I sort of consider the second section of the dialogue, begins where we left off, where Meno finally defines virtue in the kind of the form of answer that Socrates wants, if not the content. And that's where he says virtue is the power of governing mankind. And then the section runs to about the middle of the dialogue, where we get famous paradox, the Meno's paradox, which is kind of the centerpiece of the dialogue, which begins the third section. This second section is very rich in the conversation, in terms of almost the jousting that Socrates and Meno are doing, kind of verbal jousting, but also rich in philosophical distinctions, and you really get a sense of what Plato was really, what kind of thinker he really was. In any case, Meno defines virtue as the power of governing mankind, and we talked about how that might be explained. A rather odd answer in the last video. Socrates, again, the form of the definition is correct. That is, it would be trying to locate the thing that's common to all virtues or all examples of virtue, that they all have this characteristic of being the power of governing mankind. But Socrates immediately attacks the definition on the basis of its content, that it might have implications that show that it's a very bad definition of virtue. And his immediate objection is, well, is it just the power of governing that's virtue? Don't you? He says, but do you not add justly and not unjustly? That is, if someone were to govern, but govern unjustly, we wouldn't say that that's virtue, would we? And then Meno says something very important, actually, for the dialogue. He says, yes, Socrates, I agree there. For justice is virtue. And that's the kind of sloppy thinking, kind of sloppy definition that Socrates immediately pounces on, because he thinks that Meno is confused in a very basic way. And that way in which Meno is confused, I would say, is the main topic of this second section of the dialogue, making the necessary distinctions that need to be made in order to clarify what exactly a real definition of virtue, or an acceptable definition of virtue, would look like. Because Meno says justice is virtue, and Socrates says, would you say virtue, Meno, or a virtue? Meno, what do you mean? And what follows is a very interesting section where Socrates tries to explain what he means. And what he means basically is that it's just wrong to say that justice is or that virtue is justice, because of course virtue is a larger concept than the concept of justice. Contained within the larger notion of virtue are many different kinds of virtue, like justice, and they're mentioned here. The traditional Greek ideas of the essential virtues: justice, temperance, wisdom, moderation. So to say that virtue is justice is to get things wrong, because virtue is not justice, but justice is a virtue. But other virtues might include moderation and wisdom, courage, things like that. And so what Socrates tries to make clear is well, what we're really kind of looking for, again, is whatever those different virtues, justice, temperance, courage, wisdom, whatever it is that they share, their common element that makes them virtues in the first place, that would be the definition of virtue. So you couldn't just say, well, virtue is justice, but you couldn't just say justice is a virtue, because that wouldn't actually be a good definition either, because it wouldn't actually clarify what virtue in itself is. It would just give you an example. And as Socrates says, that's what Meno does. Socrates keeps asking for one thing, what he calls in Latin, which is pretty funny again. This is a translation by a Victorian scholar named Benjamin Jowett, who is putting things, I think, in wonderful English. But part of his English is that people were always quoting Latin to each other. So Socrates is speaking a little Latin here, which is, kind of funny. But the simile in multis, the common in many, that's what Socrates keeps banging on, keeps returning to. That's what I want. The thing that would be the common element in many things, the thing that would be the unifying characteristic that would bring together the multitude. Okay, justice is a virtue. We can agree on that. Moderation and wisdom and courage are additional virtues, but what we're looking for is the simile in multis, the common element of those things. What is it that makes those different things all examples of one greater thing called virtue? Tell me what that is. Define that for me. And that's what this whole business of saying, well, I mean, you wouldn't say that figure is circle. You'd say that a circle is a figure, and then you'd have to define, what is the common element to circles, squares, rectangles, triangles that makes them all examples of the larger concept of figure. And Socrates goes through that with Meno in a kind of a playful way. He defines figure for him as that which always follows color. And then he tries to clarify that in terms of a termination, the idea of an extremity, and trying to clarify the notion of figure. And this is where the jousting really comes in, and where the playfulness comes in, and perhaps where Socrates, who is a very patient man, actually begins to be exasperated a little bit with Meno. And there's also some flirting here too, well, because Meno is being difficult, and being difficult in the sense of not really being genuinely, sincerely devoted to finding the definition of virtue. He wants other things, and he wants to mess around, really. He's a student. He's like a certain type of student, and that's the way a lot of students are. They don't really want to concentrate on the thing. They want to mess around and have fun and keep it in their interests. I don't think that Meno is terribly interested in finding out what virtue is in itself in the way that Socrates is. So there is some jousting and some flirting and some playing around, where Socrates says, you're obviously very young and still have many lovers. That kind of teasing is pretty funny, considering Socrates' predilection apparently for beautiful young men, his appreciation of their beauty. So there's definitely that sort of thing going on, and it's great. It makes the dialogue really lively and adds a fun, dramatic element to it. But the philosophical point is deadly serious. Can we actually do what Socrates wants us to do and go ahead and define these things so that we can know them? Can we actually know what virtue is? And that Socrates seems to think so, right? He has said, I can't tell you whether it's teachable because I don't know what it is, but he's never said that you can't find out what it is. This is his whole purpose, is to try to do that. To try to find things like the definition of virtue or other things like beauty, knowledge, and the good. So Plato was interested in finding the definitions of these things, and Socrates has this dialectical method. He says, it's a friendly method where we try to mutually agree on premises we can both accept, and then we see what follows, and that's the process of doing philosophy. And the idea is we try to make these definitions, we see if they work. If they don't work, like defining a virtue as the power of governing, or the desire for honorable things, and the capacity to attain them. That's just his further definition. These are not necessarily bad definitions, but we have to critique them. And Socrates finds problems. Right? There's nothing, desiring honorable things is not particularly outstanding. So it doesn't seem to be really virtuous. It's just something that everyone does, and then the power of attaining them doesn't seem virtuous in itself. That's just having power. So there's all sorts of problems with Meno's definition, but Socrates isn't there to put him down or tell him he's stupid. He's there to find the truth about virtue, I think. And he wants Meno to engage in this inquiry, this rational inquiry with him. And Meno has shown signs that he's not really sincerely committed to that. And the end of this section, where is it? Yeah, here. Socrates is trying to clarify things. He's trying to show up the absurd implications of some of the things that Meno has said, so they can sort of clear the boards, clear the decks, and begin again. Socrates says, then begin again and answer me. What, according to you and your friend Gorgias, is the definition of virtue? Like, this is the method, right? You don't necessarily make progress in this linear way where every step in the conversation gets you closer to its end. It does have a circular structure. You keep coming back to the same question, but the idea is that every time you come back to it, you're in a better spot to answer it because you've cleared away some of the rubbish in your mind. You've taken the wrong turn a couple times, so maybe you have a better idea, right? It's not something that Socrates would say is discouraging. It's called philosophy. But Meno, in his response, that is obviously trying to distract Socrates. He says, "Oh, Socrates, I used to be told before I knew you that you were always doubting yourself and making others doubt. And now you are casting your spells over me, and I am simply getting bewitched and enchanted, and am at my wit's end. And if I may venture to make a jest upon you, you seem to me, both in your appearance and in your power over others, to be very like the flat torpedo fish who torpifies those who come near him." He's talking about an electric eel, right? "And touch him as you have now torpified me, I think, for my soul and my tongue are really torpid, sleepy and sluggish, like he's been shocked, right? And I do not know how to answer you, and though I have been delivered of an infinite variety of speeches about virtue before now, and to many persons, and very good ones they were, as I thought, at this moment I cannot even say what virtue is. And I think that you are very wise in not voyaging and going away from home, for if you did in other places, as you do in Athens, you would be cast into prison as a magician." Really great. Oh, what a great section, Because on the one hand, he is avoiding the subject. He doesn't really want to do the hard work of trying to define virtue. But on the other hand, he says these really kind of true things about Socrates. That's what Socrates did. That's why he was so enchanting, is that people thought they knew things before they talked to him. And after talking to him, they realized that they didn't know what they thought they knew. It's such a typical thing in the dialogues that it's not the end all and be all of what Socrates was doing, but it was a very important step to get somebody to understand that they didn't really know what they thought they knew. That is necessary to get them to actually look into it further, right? Why would you look into something if you thought you already knew it? You have to be shown that you don't know it, and that philosophical inquiry, rational philosophical inquiry, is actually necessary. But this brings up what follows and what begins the third section, where Meno introduces this paradox. We might as well just briefly read it now. It's really the beginning of the next section. And remember, Socrates has said, I don't know what virtue is. I don't know what it is. And now he's convinced Meno that Meno doesn't know what it is either. He's shown Meno that he doesn't know. He thought he knew, but he didn't really. So both of them don't know what it is. And this is the necessary background to keep in mind for what Meno is about to say, where he says this here. "And how will you inquire, Socrates, into that which you do not know? What will you put forth as a subject of inquiry? And if you find what you want, how will you ever know that this is the thing which you did not know?" Which is this amazing challenge to the possibility of philosophical inquiry. I mean, if you don't know something, how did you ever find out? If you don't know something, how will you look for it? And even if you find it by chance, by stumbling upon it, how will you know that that's what you were looking for if you don't know what you're looking? This tremendous, I would say, very serious objection to the whole process of rational inquiry into the truth. So this is where we should begin the third section of the Meno.